was and how formal education was to be or used to be done. So in this class, what we are going to do is look at how these changes have taken place, who are the key actors and what are the requirements, how different is formal education from the rites of passages which traditionally marked the phase of introduction of values and cultural and the social organization and everything. So as you may rightfully know, and based on the discussions we have had last semester, the formal or education generally was to provide the skills as well as the skills required, essentially for the various sectors. And then this was done in a different way. There were various agents of this socialization, but central in this whole socialization was the family, right? And we talked about how these families went about that business of ensuring that the person who is alien to the society is made to become familiar and culturally adaptive to the new environment. So these rites were significantly celebrated through various rituals, right from birth even to the last phase among the human phase. So death and funeral were all significant phases in the life of the individual by which the value system of the community and the society were transferred, okay, to members of the society. Beyond these, there were also other mechanisms by which people acquire certain skills. So we talk about apprenticeship, right? And many of the skills that were also acquired were not deliberately done, but it was like learning by doing. So you follow your father, you follow your mother. We talk about the fact that some of the knowledge and the skills were gender-based. And so there were certain things that you were expected to know and you end up knowing by virtue of being a woman. There are certain things that you were expected to know and you ended up knowing by virtue of being a man, just by following your father to the farm regularly, just by following your mom to the market, to the farm, and in the kitchen, you acquire these sets. That notwithstanding, we also realized that among them, minority, there were people who were able to cross the various dominant practices, right? So we talk about the fact that even though hunting, for example, and even now, predominantly happens to be a man's field, you still had some few women who endeavor to do that. In terms of even priesthood, even though to date it's still predominantly a man's field, you still find one or two women who were in there and doing certain things. You can have fishing and all that. There were still some women who will go fishing, right? And what have you. In that light, I don't think the settings have significantly changed, because even for now, you still have some fields that are predominantly male, whereas there are other fields that are also predominantly female dominated, right? And what have you. And in then you still have the exceptions. So for today, we are looking at over the period, what has been the change, what has been the new form of knowing and transmitting knowledge. And so we're going to talk about formal classroom education. So we are going to look at the origins and the main objectives for the introduction of formal education, especially by the colonial regime in the Gold Coast and now in Ghana. We are going to look at the changes that are also taking place within the educational system as well as the value of formal education and what that means. Then we will look at the impact of formal education, particularly on the social structure of Ghana. What does that mean? And what are some of the statistics? Unfortunately for this class, we will still have to hold on to the old statistics because the 2021 census data isn't available. But when it comes, one of the things we will be knowing is that what is the level of education in Ghana? How many people have ever had formal education? How many people have ever had higher level education? And what does that mean to all this schools? So essentially, what is formal education? And I want to just pick this simple definition, and it says that, it is the training process, and I like the word here, training process. And you see, anytime I am having my discussion with you, you see that I've really highlighted certain aspects. It tells you where probably my emphasis is going to be. It is a training process whereby an individual, and very important, has progressed beyond primary socialization. Who has progressed beyond primary socialization learns about and acquires the skills required for his or her survival. So for formal education, what we are saying is that before formal education, there is a primary socialization. And ordinarily, this is what happened. Even though currently in our current form, this definition can be criticized, and I guess it should be criticized, because for many people, the setting of formal education, and again, when you are doing your criticisms, be guided. The setting as well as the medium by which formal education takes place is introduced to them. It is there that they even acquire the primary socialization currently. Whereas in the past, the child would have had to progress, overcome all the primary socialization. When we talk about primary socialization, we are talking about some of the instinctual behaviors. Speech, for example, bodily movement. In this case, we are talking about ability to walk, ability to talk, ability to respond to nature call, And that is why in the past, formal education started at age 6. So that at age 6, the child would have acquired speech, he would have acquired motion, he would have acquired the instinctual sense. So he wouldn't be required to be either to wee-wee, to use the toilet, and all those as other things. So that even if he is to be assisted, he would have been in a position where he can communicate these demands to the providers, right? And what have you. So another key point, and so that is the beyond these things. Then he learns about and then acquire the skills required for his or her survival. So it does two things. It gives you the knowledge. Okay, formal education gives you the knowledge. Okay, and then you are then get to have that knowledge as part of yourself for life or for living, right? So you acquire that knowledge, understand the content, and then it becomes a part of you for living, right? And that is what education, unfortunately, there are many students, and I hope none of you included, who do not acquire knowledge for living. They only learn about it, but the knowledge never becomes a part of their lives. And so there have been instances where you are walking about, you meet a student, and he tells you what he has been able to achieve, and you are made to ask yourself whether really this student or this person has acquired or has gone through the phase of education that he claims to have done that, right? Or he claims to have done, or he claims to have achieved. There have been instances where we have got to question the basis of the knowledge that person is expanding, right? And so people sometimes, colloquially, what we say that he went to school, but the school didn't go through him, or he went to the school, but he failed to let the school go through him, right? But essentially, if you look at formal education, you do not just learn, but you also acquire that skills for survival. So on the next line, the other thing that you also talk about has to be the fact that it is a process. So it's not an event. Formal education is not an event. Unlike the way sometimes in the traditional societies where some of these things appears, but even that, when the events were organized, the events were only organized to mark a phase of that learning process, right? Or to usher you into the, even in the formal setting, some of these events are done. And so let's take note. So for example, you go to the university, we do a matriculation for you that officially announces to you that you have been admitted, and from now on, you are a member of the university community. When you are done with your lessons and you have acquired, you have fulfilled all the requirement, a graduation ceremony is done, congregation, where you are officially pronounced as having acquired this degree. These are some of the ceremonial events that are done to mark that phase of your life. So the individual learns to take account of social order, and that's what I just talked about. So you acquire the discipline, you acquire the need to follow the requirements, the rules, the understanding required, and then you cope with by some combination of conformity, right, and non-conformity, avoidance, and sometimes in the process you create conflict. And I would like to take this one. So order is what is required of me? What am I supposed to follow? What is it that, and what is the rationale behind it? Why do we do this? So for example, why must I show up at 5:30 and not 4:30? So you show up 5:30 because that's what the arrangement is. And there's a reason why, for example, level 2 and level 2 sociology, you have been divided into 3. So we can have a bit more efficient and fruitful discussion, right? By the same group of people. Some combination of, and some of the things that you are learning, some will let you challenge your existing values. Some will probably give you a better understanding, and so you comply with them. Some will give you a skills that will require that you avoid certain complications, right? And some will also require that you confront certain myth or misnomer or certain rough generalization. And that is what formal education generally is. I want to pause here if there's any question. If you have a question, you can please ask, or if you have any contribution, you can do. So I can move to the next content, yes. Do I assume that there are no questions and that we are following the discussion? All right. You can always give me a sign if you have to. Now, so generally we say that formal classroom education is then seen as secondary socialization, right? It's seen as secondary socialization. And I've said that you then should have progressed from primary socialization. And we know the key agents of primary socialization happens to be the parents and the family. But when we come to formal education, then the key agent then becomes the teacher, right? The teacher, depending on the level of learning, is supposed to engage both in a personal, generally in an impersonal base, but sometimes people expect them to be personal, especially at a very lower level. You are expected to be emotionally attached. You are expected to do the things that ordinarily the mother would have done. But at the same time, you are restricted. And you're supposed to be very formal and treat every child equally without any emotional, sentimental affiliations and affections and all those other things, right? So one of the key things that happens in formal education is that it's supposed to normally take place within a formal setting. The typical is that there's a classroom. So every morning you're supposed to go there and follow certain protocol. These classrooms until recently were almost always physical. Now, COVID and other things have taught us that this classroom formal setting can also be virtual. It is scheduled, right? So it's a periodic thing. Content is graduated, right? So just like how lessons were also graduated in terms of age appropriateness and sometimes the ability to overcome or understand achieve certain milestones, right? This formal education comes in the form of general knowledge and sometimes also formal training or professional training where you acquire certain specific set of skills, right? That is deemed very essential for survival, if you get the point that I made the last time. All right. Now, what is essentially formal mandate or formal education? So I have talked about the fact that it's usually the inculcation of basic skills, right? Which ranges from instinctual behavior to the method of science. I've already touched about it. It also gives social aspiration as to what people want to become in future, how they can, and even help people to achieve the ideal self. So these are the questions that you're going to ask yourself. Am I having these things by the kind of education that I'm having? Is the education that I'm having helping me to deal with my instinctuals? Am I able to subject my instinct to the appropriate control to ensure social order, conformity, and what have you? Am I having the specific set of knowledge that had I not been to school, I would still have had those ones? What is education making you to think and dream about? And has it in any way helped you to understand who you are and better still the set of skills that you require in coping with? This broadly was never the idea or the initial idea behind the setting up of school. We all understand that for most people, or historically, education was introduced more as a means to closing the gap or the communication gap, to be specific, between the missionaries as well as the colonial regime. Because they couldn't speak and couldn't have efficient communication, they deemed it very important to facilitate this demand. Okay, so for the Christians also needed it so they can share the word of God, particularly the Christian missions. No wonder most of the foundational schools were built by them. So to demonstrate this, Governor Roy, in justifying why formal education had to be pushed, had this to say to his other people and trying to justify the budgetary allocation and the resources that they needed, okay, to ensure that the colonies were educated. And he reads, see, greater attention must be paid to our schoolwork. And you know, if you are working and you are getting frustrated, you are not getting the expected results, and then you do your SWOT analysis or your SWOT analysis, then that is what you want to do. He says that, listen, going forward, we must pay greater attention to our schoolwork. Our only hope in ensuring that we achieve our target is with the young people. As for the older people, comparatively, little can be expected. So if you really want to have an impact in the things that you're seeking to do, then focus on education. Let's teach the children. Forget about the old guys. I mean, they are too old. Their mind is completely made up. There's no way they can change. We can change them now. And I mean, let me just chip into this, and I'm sure majority have been following the discussion currently on the LGBTQI plus debate. And the proponent, for example, of the bill, which seeks to make it clearer, the sanctions and whatever against the community of the LGBT, is to say that what they are seeking to do is an investment there. So, and this conversation started, I think, 2 or 3 years ago, when this whole comprehensive sexuality education emerged. And the whole idea was that because they have tried and realized that they were probably not going to be successful with the adult population. Now, let's start from school. So that as young as they are open to new ideas and will be able to do that. So today I saw these, and I don't know if some of you have seen it, about the Superman, right? Superman.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Who is now presented as a bisexual.
Yes.
And the Superman has been a hero for most young kids. And every child appears to love to see the Superman show. Now, the Superman is presented as a bisexual. Essentially, what does it mean? He can have sex with his male colleagues as well as have sex with his female colleagues, right? So in the same orientation, that's debate that people are now pushing across, right? Which, I mean, aligns with what Governor Roy had said earlier on. And these sentiments were also shared, sorry. These sentiments were also shared, not also by the local people by then. So the king of Akropon then, Nana Adodankwa, has said that if you can show us a black man who can read the white man's books, you know, the white man's books, then we will follow you. Because when the people were pushing the agenda that their way of life was better, it makes you organized, and that they can also be like them and all that. So what actually appealed to them was the ability for people to read text and communicate to them. And you know, around that time, some of their colleagues had had some form of education, and you always needed somebody to interpret the content to you. And the person who read these messages when they were dealing with the chiefs always happened to be the white man. And so he pushed this whole idea that, listen, if you can find a black man, that if you could find such a person, then they will be able to find space in and agree to engage them with the Bible, right? So the argument is that the school idea, the ability to read and write, appear to be more appealing even to the local folks than the gospel. And the truth of the matter is that no matter how the content of the Bible is, it's only meaningful if you can understand what it is. And how do you understand the Bible when you cannot read? Right. And so that explains why in most of these schools, the emphasis were generally on your ability to read and write. And unfortunately, we haven't still been able to go beyond the grammar schools. So for example, almost all the so-called big schools in Ghana are grammar schools. And they are big because they are grammar schools. They are not big because they are science driven or their science achievement are superior or their vocational achievement are any better than the rest. It is a grammar, right? So when they are talking about their old school mates, hello? Can you hear me, please? Hello? Hello? Hey, hello?
I think so. It's back.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Hello, sir.
You can hear me, right?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you.
Yes, please.
All right, thank you very much. So I was having some difficulties with the internet. I mean, sometimes you can just misbehave. So sorry, I'm back. So the point that I was essentially making was that because the colonial regime had the ability to communicate, the need to facilitate the gospel spread, it became a seemingly part of the content, and the emphasis was on grammar rather than the sciences and all that. And so that's the point that I wanted to make, or that was the point I was making when the line dropped. So as part of it, if you look at the initial content of education, they talk about this whole idea about God, the oneness of God. So you can't believe, and again, look at it, contrast that one with the African belief about the poly, right? That they believe in a hierarchy of gods and what have you. And this guy said they was a no, for us there's only one God. And morality was a key precept or a key component of what we were being taught at school. It hasn't changed. Majority of the things are still in place. The sin was also a key component. And so sometimes in treating issues of disobedience, it is tied with the concept of sin. And then again, salvation and life afterwards was also an essential component of the modern form of classroom education in the past. In fact, even currently, it is still part. So RME is a very important subject that is taught right up to the secondary school, right? But for people who were old, the renunciation of polygyny and multiple wives were also very important. You couldn't attend their school if you had multiple wives and what have you. And if you are, once again, if you are following the discussion currently on LGBT, one of the things that people are also talking about it is that why is it that the Europeans always feel like they have the right to impose certain value system on us? If your argument currently is that certain things are bad and then they are universal rights, how come you were able to impose and for some strange reason encourage people to say that having multiple wives or multiple partners were criminal, and so they have to renounce it? But you think that other people can have what they believe to be uncanny knowledge and what have you, right? And so some of these things are still coming out. But you see, these were the content. And some of these things gradually found space, even in our modern constitution and other relevant documents and documentations, right? So the point essentially is that these were the things that people were exposed to as part of formal education in the initial phase. The main focus in terms of academic then was also on what became known as the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? So the emphasis, again, I've talked about the grammar. So the emphasis on the ability to read, the ability to write, and don't forget, this is what Governor Roy has said. And Nana Addo Dankwa had even emphasized the ability to read the white man's book, right? And then obviously they also felt that you also need some calculations, so arithmetic. The other subjects, as we have already indicated, was the issue about biblical studies. Then you do a bit of geography so that you know your location. You do a bit of your history. Physical training was also very important. And then singing as part of the creative arts. So most schools had a singing group. They had a sports team, being it football and what have you, right? Yes. How different is this from what currently pertains? So on the back of the influence that the missions had, on this page, I talk about some of the very old schools or the early day schools and those who established them. So PTC is a training college built by the Basel Mission in 1848. What were they supposed to do? They were supposed to train teachers who in turn inculcate these values. Infantsipim, for example, was also built by the Methodist Church in 1876. Adisado, we all know, by the Anglicans. Accra High in 1923, okay, by Bachman and his team. Reverend Roberts, who was also St. Augustine's, Wesley Girls, and the likes. In fact, almost all the big schools. Yes, Governor Roy was a governor of the Gold Coast. So the point that essentially we are trying to make here is the argument that they influence, and I mean, almost all, like I said, the very old schools were put forth that by these people, you know, the missionaries, and the activities were also governed by that. Vocational training and technical training featured quite little in the activities, right? But some of them also started. But again, because it came later, and even now, it is not as popular as the grammar schools, right? So for example, the Basel missionaries also started by giving attention to vocational training. Towards the 19th century, administration was also expanding, and there was a need for such artisans, tailors, carpenters, masons, to work out because you needed to do all these things. But like I said, that notwithstanding, the focus was primarily, and there were more funds, there were more scholarship for grammar schools as compared to the vocational training. And to some extent, it has also reflected in our emphasis in our educational needs. Majority of us, when we are asked to choose school, are more likely to go for the grammarian schools than the arts, right? The art schools are generally not the preferred schools. So what are we saying essentially? What formal education then did for us or impacted is that it essentially created a gap between the educated and their traditional and cultural environment, right? Because you went to school, automatically your social value systems were towards European culture. And those who had not been to school then had to suffer that. So due to the content, okay, the people trained, developed the European lifestyle. It actually changed their general outlook of the educated because they could communicate with the outside world, right? And also they ended up having more respect. They were revered. And that also did not just end there. It also had impact on their wealth and power and social mobility. So people who didn't have certain resources by virtue of education then suddenly became, because they needed clerks and they will be there. They needed administrators and they are the ones to be poured on. And that automatically then created distortion in the socialization processes, because they had power, they had resources, right? And you can also talk about the fact that then they created a disconnect between the traditional authorities who then initially had these powers and could command respect and what have you, as compared to the new elites who have become very powerful over a short period because they had formal education. We also talk about the fact that formal education then gave us a formal language, which is English, which then becomes the medium for national communication, so that an Ewe man and an Akan man, a Dagomba man, do not necessarily have to learn to speak Goa, Ga, Dagati, and all that. All you require to ensure that we can interact within the Gold Coast and within Ghana currently is to learn English. People think that it had contributed to the development of the nation. Others sometimes also think that it hasn't brought the expected development that we need. But essentially, one of the things that formal education have done is to ensure that there's an integration into the global space. And some also think that it has also brought even national integration and cohesion, right? The English language then takes away certain misconception. It takes away certain challenges and difficulties, right? That without that language, we would have had to struggle with. If you still have questions, you can ask, you can raise your hand, I'll give you an opportunity to ask, and then we continue. So I pull out some of these statistics. Okay. So 74.1% of the population, that is 11 years and older, is literate. In other words, they can read and write at least one language. Those who are 11 years and older, as at the 2010 population and housing census. The previous figure was 54.1 in the 2000s. So we expected that the 2021 data will give us another higher report. 20.1% can read and write in English, right? Then 53.7% can read and write in at least one Ghanaian language, which is also very interesting, right? Very, very interesting. In terms of gender, region, and distribution of the educated, these are some of the statistics that I pulled out from the 2010 population and housing census. About 80% of the males can read or are literate, as compared to 68.5%. And I'm sure you know the reason why there are more male literate than female. Yes, who can guess?
No, sir.
Why don't you know? Who can help us? Why do you think there are more literate males than? Yes.
Me.
Wait. Let me. Deborah, let me hear you. Deborah, followed by Josephine. Yes. Deborah, let me hear you. Deborah, I can't hear you. Speak up. Hello? No, she seems to be speaking, but I can't hear. Jesse, Johan is next. Can you unmute and speak?
Sir, please, I think the females mostly they like to work. They like to work than like getting education.
Okay. I don't know what that means. Enoch, can I hear you? Then Josephine, I thought your hand was down. So let me do Enoch and then do Josephine, yes.
I think the whole idea of women belong to the kitchen and women do not get education started from this point. When they felt
Enoch, your line is actually I got the point that you want to make. Thank you very much. You're talking about historical preference.
Education in order to straighten their affairs off.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes, can I hear Josephine?
Yes, sir. Sir, I think as at that time, society believes that women are for the kitchen, and then they also believe that they are for the kitchen, and the men are supposed to, they are the breadwinners, so they are supposed to go to school and then get a profession or a career so that they can look after the females or the female when they get married to them.
All right. Thank you. Bliss. And then I will do my colorful. So Bliss, go ahead.
Adding to what Josephine said, it was also believed that if ladies are sent to school and then they get knowledge and all that, they would be paired with the men. So it was believed that they would rather stay in the kitchen, or they have to stay in the kitchen and then help cook for their husbands to go and work.
Okay.
I'm done.
Thank you. Michael, can I hear you now?
I think high rate of teenage pregnancy.
Yo, Marty, why?
Hello, sir, can you hear me?
Marty, thank you. Victus, let me hear you. Are the last person.
Sir, please, let's continue. Thank you.
Marty, why? All right. I mean, essentially, the point you guys made are almost correct. But you see, you need to put it in the context. It was also hard to do, I think, is one, the level of understanding, the level of orientation then. It is also an issue of poverty, right? People had so many children, they couldn't educate all of them, so they have to make a choice. And in most cases, then the choice then favored the men. Because this whole idea of the women belonging to the kitchen, yes, were there for everybody. However, the rich family, right, never made their daughters to stay home. Do you get it? And so, in fact, there's also an account where the male were rather made to stay home because they didn't want to be contaminated. And the whole idea is that if they get contaminated in terms of foreign values, their countries were going to be, or their communities were going to be at risk. And so they would rather send the girls and the slaves to go to all that, right? But I mean, but broadly, that is the argument. There was this, and you guys were talking as if these things are statistics from 50 or 80 years ago. This is the current state of the statistics, right? And if you look at the statistics, and I'm going to show you some statistics, even today, these things do happen. Even today, these things do happen. There are more educated males than females, and it continues happening. There are regional variations as well as at 2010, that if you put the three northern regions together, you had less than 50% of the residents of the northern region being less educated, okay, or being literate. Less than 50% were being literate. But if you take the other regions, it was almost 70%. And then you begin to ask yourself, if as early as the 1950s, for example, people within the northern enclaves were given free education, at least at this, free education up to the secondary level, then what is that? And that is when you see that some tribes, culture is also strong than financial barrier. Because if the argument, as I put forth, was that financial barrier was huge, and so people were forced to make a choice, then what about the 3 northern regions? We didn't really have financial barrier in terms of access to formal education up to the secondary level. But the reality was also that, yes, they were probably not paying fees, but the other things required were so huge, a financial barrier that many of them still couldn't afford. So one of the things we probably will be doing now is to look at how, when they took, for example, so when in 2003, the Kufuor then introduced what became known as the capitation grant, which took away PTA dues, which took away culture fees, we took away all the other petty fees from the school, right? And then made primary education virtually free. What was the impact? They didn't necessarily increase intake. And the record suggests so. What about when they took away? Because when people normally talk about education in the northern part of Ghana, secondary education in the northern part of Ghana being free, it was actually just the feeding fee. So they used to call it the feeding grant, because even in the South, people were not paying for tuition, right? But they will pay for a feeding grant and other things. Now, is the numbers likely to change now that all the cost of secondary education has been taken off? Because those days, the students have to pay for their uniforms. Now their uniforms are not being paid for, right? Exercise books and the rest and all those other things, textbooks and all that. Would that be, if the record suggests so, then you may then argue that it was a matter of the economics and not necessarily the culture that hindered or created this barrier. Any question? So some of the enrollment statistics as at 2010, I still share it here. Less than, never attended school, right? That is those who are below 3 years. Okay, even that, see, there are more females today as compared to males. Those who attended school in the past, as at the time that they did a study, you look at it, 39.5%. And here, slight difference between the female and the males, right? Oh, sorry. So some of you guys had put up a write-up. I didn't see, sorry. So you see, yes, I get your point. The ladies were seen as being made for the kitchen. Yeah, that point has been made. Amanda says, during the time when formal education was introduced, our country also had the belief of men being breadwinners and women being housewives or useful in the kitchen, but thanks to urbanization, that belief has been reduced. That's why men are more high. Okay, all right, so that's the point. Deborah then says, please, the males are asked most of the time to pursue school, and then women are to be in the kitchen, all right. That thing is still there, because even sometimes they will tell you that, why are you wasting your time? After all, no matter the level of education you get, you will still come back to be somebody's wife. And being a wife doesn't require so much education and whatever. So yes, I tend to have that, agree with that. There's some validity in that point. But my argument is that it's more of income level and social mobility, essentially, right? It's about resource constraint. That doesn't mean that because there are still people who could have afforded to train their girls, but decided not to, right? Yeah, so I don't challenge that one as well. So as at the time they did the study, those, again, look at it, there were still less females in school. Okay, all right. Now, if you look at the urban-rural thing, this way also gives you an idea about the poverty dimension to these disparities that we are observing. Those who have never attended school, if you come to the urban center, just look at it. Just look at the numbers. Both sexes, okay, it was just 14% as compared to 33. There were only fewer males, just 4.6%, who have never attended school and are living in the urban centers, as compared to 13.8%. And then look at the females, 9.7% and all that. So again, and even those in school, almost the same thing. The very interesting thing is that when you take the males, okay, interestingly, there were more people in the rural communities who are currently attending school than the males in the urban centers. Again, it's also because it's a matter of age. Urbanization, remember last week when we were discussing urbanization, we talked about the fact that when there's rural-urban migration, it is usually the able bodies, those of working age, who will move, right? So majority of the people, and this also reflected, and I think I mentioned it in class, that even though up until 2021, there were more people in Ashanti region than in Greater Accra. But when it comes to the voter register, you had more people on the voter register in Greater Accra than in Ashanti region. The reason was very simple. There were more people moving to Accra who are old, who are of working age, than those who moved to. Yes. Let me hold on. If there are some questions I would like to take. If not, then I will give my few summary and some observation. I'm surprised there's something I was supposed to talk to you about, but it's not on my slide. Yes, hello. Who wants to talk to me? Okay, Francisca, mute yourself. Bliss, is your hand new or is the old one?
Sir, please, the old one.
Then please lower it. All right. So let me share another slide with you that gives you an idea of our educational system, and we probably all have to read it. So the Ghana education system, we all know, but let's read together. So formal education in Ghana begins with 2 years of kindergarten. So we all know the structure of our formal education. That's what I want you to know. 6 years of primary school, right? And 3 years of junior high school. So primary and junior high school are generally free, and enrollment rates are close to 95% in primary schools and are around 75% in junior high school. So again, look at something that is interesting. It tells you that between the transition from primary even to junior high school, there tends to be a drop, right? At the end of the junior high school, we all know students will take the basic education certificate examination, popularly known as the BEC, and those with high enough grade qualify for senior high school. Again, let me say that these analyses predate the introduction of the free senior high school. And so just take note of these statistics. They say that passing rates are low. That is the BEC, passing rates are low. Around 70% of junior high school entrants go on to take the BEC, and 60% of BEC takers will pass. So the transition from So in primary school, if you understand this line, what it's trying to say is that about 95% of people within that age will be in school. But when they are transitioning from primary to senior high, to junior high school, about 20% drop out. Those who end up at JSS, about 5% will also drop out. So only 70% will take the exam. Of the 70% who will take, only 60% will pass. In other words, if you take 100 people to write the BEC, 60 people will pass. And then they will then go to, right? Now look at it. So this gentleman, Ajayi, and his team in 2020 find out 30% of those who get admitted do not enroll in senior high school the following year. So it was these numbers that the free senior high school then assumed that they were not attending school because they couldn't afford the fees, right? So that 30% of the 60 who passed out of the 100, okay, were those that was to be catered for. Enoch, your hand is up. Unmute yours. The last time your network was bad. I hope this time will be better, but just unmute yourself and make your intervention. Enoch, unmute yourself and speak. Wow, I don't know what is happening.
Hello, sir, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
All right, sir. So I wanted you to finish with this thing before I asked the question. I wanted a clarification on something.
Okay. So if that's what your decision is, let me continue. So the point that I'm making is that when Ajayi and Co did their study in 2020, they said that about 30% of those who get admitted. So again, it means that when they took the BEC, it means that they passed. It means that they were placed in school. 30% of these people never took up their place, right, in the following year. And you see, it is critical because unlike senior high school, that you can decide when to enroll in the university, high school is not like that. You only attend school by placement, right? And that's very critical. So you get that 30%. Now, he then gives us some statistics as to the fees, because the free senior high school policy was premised on the idea that these 30% who get admitted and enrolled in school do not take up their place because they cannot afford. Now, let's see some of the figures in terms of how much they're paying. So in the study, it says that in 2011, government approved tuition fees. And again, look at it, for day or non-boarding students in senior high school was around 500 Ghana cedis. Okay, a very large sum in a country where, so people say, oh, it's only 500 Ghana cedis, but for a study, it's the argument that it is huge, because if you look at it in terms of how much every Ghanaian is supposed to have, it was 2,400 for a whole year. That is what the average Ghanaian gets as his per capita income, right? And it was 2,400. The 500 is deemed as a very significant share of that amount, right? So they felt that it was huge and it could serve as a barrier. And again, don't forget, this is only for these students. Okay, this was only for these students. And we know for boarding students, they were going to pay this amount in addition to feeding and other boarding fees, which could then be like 3 or 4 times this amount, right? And so that was the context in which we put this discussion. So you continue to say that as of 2010, girls were 6 percentage points less likely to reach senior high school than boys. Again, coming back to the same thing. Some of those who do not enroll in senior high school then ended up enrolling in the vocational and technical school. Yes, so Enoch, this is the point I wanted to make. So if you have your question, you can go ahead and make that question.
Okay, I think it's in line with what I want to ask. But please, can you hear me?
Go ahead, I can hear you.
Right. So can we say that the level of education these days is as a result of our form of education, as in we have placed much attention on the grammar aspect of education. And for that reason, if students or if pupils start their education and they feel like, excuse me to say, they are not bright enough to pass the test they are given, it makes them drop out of school. Can we say that?
To some extent, yes. To some extent, yes, because you see, our system appears not to is structured in a very limited way. So we struggle to identify people with other set of skills beyond the grammar, right? And so the argument is that it's like our educational system is set up in such a way that it's like we are assessing every student using the same one scale, knowing very well that the students are diverse, right? So some students are definitely not going to be good orally, right? If you ask them a question, they will not be able to remember exactly what you told them. But if you give them an opportunity to do what you have taught them, they will be able to do it. But unfortunately, our educational system does not make that option available to many of the students, generally. Do you get it? And so creativity and innovativeness, which is also very essential, appears not to be a focus of the educational system. It's your ability to replicate. It's your ability to reproduce what was said in class. And that's why I always tell you people, if you are expecting me to ask you, list this, state this, then you are wrong. You will never have such a question in my class. And then again, the difficulty then that we are having now, particularly at the university level, and I'm going to use this, is that because the foundation didn't emphasize on creativity and application of knowledge outside the classroom setting, it becomes very then difficult at the university to then expect students to do this. And I sometimes say this, and sometimes maybe we as instructors are also part of the problem, because we end up confusing the students. So whereas maybe in my class, I expect you not to recollect and do a recall, and that your ability to understand the concept so you can apply it to a real world situation. You go to another discipline, you go to another course. And what I have condemned and appears to be saying that is not the way to learn is what is required of you as a student, right? So it appears that there's a disjoint between even what the university professes to be requiring of you. Because I have seen, for example, some questions that is requiring you to state and explain this. And I'm telling you that a university is a higher level of learning. It's about application, your ability to understand the concept and apply it to real world situation. And real world situation, nobody's going to ask you define sociology. Let's four founding fathers of sociology and their core argument. No, the real world situation will be, they will give you a scenario and you are expected to use the core argument of the founding fathers, or if you were the founding fathers, how would the founding fathers would have explained this phenomena, or to what extent that these phenomena reflect in the core argument. So it then emphasizes on creativity, application of solutions, and what have you. And so to some extent, I agree perfectly with you. And this is the same orientation. So look at it. Nobody wants his son to go to the school, go and learn mechanics, right? Nobody wants his son to go to school and become a carpenter. But these are critical components of building a nation, right? Because why? We want the person to why. And that is where, so you grow up where the carpenter, the mason is looked down upon. in your home, right? And then suddenly you are told that now you choose that job. Nobody's going to choose that. And so it requires a comprehensive or reorientation. You have to make it fancy, let people understand how important this technical and vocational training is. If that is not done, no matter how important amount we push in, many people will still not be able or not be willing to do it. I don't know if that answers your question. Any other question, please? Any other person? If not, then I guess we will end our class here today. And hopefully we will discuss this. But I mean, the last thing that I want to talk about our formal education, beyond the structure that I've listed, is the diversity that you can also see in especially in urban areas. So there appears to be a hierarchy of schools. Okay, there's a tier. So the most popular one is the government schools. Okay. And we have already talked about the fact that at the basic level, okay, at the basic level, you have government schools, you have private schools, and even the private schools can be divided into two in terms of the curriculum, being used, right? There are those who are doing the international curriculum and those who are doing the GES curriculum, right? And then if you come to the secondary school, you still have the government school, so at the secondary school, you have the government school as well as the private. But here it appears, so in the primary or the basic level, the private is the go-to, right? But at the secondary level, the government is the go-to. Do you get it? And then you come to the third level, which is the tertiary. The tertiary, you still have government, and then you still have the private. Okay, here too, the government appears to be the go-to. All right, and that is what is happening. And there are reasons why the government appears to be the go-to. But don't forget, some of the private is actually now challenging the discourse here and here, right? Some of them are happening. So the chassis, the Accra, what's the name? Accra City School, and other private schools are challenging and are also making a bit more, obviously because, and these are all based on the supposed weaknesses in the government schools and the promises that these ones offer. Any question, please? Any additional, any question, any comment? All right, thank you. Since there are no comments, I think we can call it a day. The recordings will be made available. Take your time, play the tape, watch the video, take care of your notes, and then if after that you still have questions, when we meet next week, we'll be able to resolve them. All right, so thank you very much once again. I think we will just have to bring the class to an end. I mean, I've exhausted the content, so we are good to go. It's just to remind you that the IA has scheduled for next week.
Sir, your last statement, we couldn't hear clearly because the line was breaking.
No, all that I was trying to say was that the audio and the videos are going to be available. Get them, watch them, play them. Yes. Yes, what is it?
We were talking about the private universities and the government universities.
Oh, what exactly was that? I mean, I was just saying that if you look at this, currently, they are, I mean, until recently, maybe the last 10 years, in terms of secondary school and tertiary schools, tertiary level, the government school predominated, I mean, was the dominant, was the preferred choice. Many people never, even if you offered them even a private education, they would never have taken it, right? Because they were the choices. But I think the last 10 years, this narrative appears to be changing, right? So there are some who will tell you that, again, it's a matter of resources that is available. Because when they say in a secondary school that they want a private school, they're not talking about the remedial 10 private schools. No, they are talking about full-scale schools like Akosomo International, like Ghana International, like the Steve Adai School, Christian High, and the likes. Those are the ones that they are talking about. And so among the elite who can afford, because the amount being paid them, those will be their preferred choices. That's the point I wanted to make. The same argument can also be made for the tertiary levels, right? Where government appears to have predominated. I mean, in our days when I was enrolling, it never clicked my mind that there was going to be a private school, a private university. You know, for many of us, if you were studying in Ghana, then it was Legon or Tech or Cape Coast. Even those who went to Cape Coast, we used to laugh at them, right? But that narrative is actually changing. And now, beyond the competitiveness that the other universities poses to the Legons, even the private universities are also, for many people, the private universities are their first choice. And so they don't go there because they didn't get the Legons. In the past, that was what was happening, but some now don't even want the Legon. They don't want the KNUS, they don't want the KVAS. It is the Ashasi they want, it is the Central University they want. It is the
Valley View.
I'm not sure Valley View still poses that much competition. There's this school, engineering school, Accra, is it Accra City or Accra, something like that? Academic City, yes. Yeah, so those are the rare competitors, and people are kind of having them as their preferred first choice. So for the gentleman who asked, that was the argument I was making. Yes, go ahead. What was what?
Oh, okay, sir.
What of what?
Sir, UPSA.
Yeah, I mean, UPSA is still a government school, but again, I mean, 20, yeah, let me even say 20, 15 years ago, I mean, UPSA wasn't a go-to school. Again, also because of the limited focus, UPSA was purely a business school, right? In fact, at a point, UPSA, which used to be called IPS, was not a degree awarding institution. So my generation, who went to IPS, never came with a degree.
Diploma.
No, even a diploma, no. They went there only as a training ground for them to take the international certification examination. So you either go there to do ICA for the chartered accountants, or you went there to do ACCA or CIMG, the Chartered Institute of Marketing Ghana exams, and or the UK. So that was actually how the UPSA thing was, which was then IPS, right? So you left there depending on the part you had completed. Then you go then. If you are not able to charter, then when you are outside, you continue to write them, right? All right, so if there are no questions, somebody is asking whether I have an areas for the I. Unfortunately, no. All that I know is that it's going to be objectives, generally about 30 or so. So you try to get your 30 marks or 40 marks for it. I haven't even sat down to look at the questions, but I'll make sure. It's going to cover everything that we have discussed. And my only advice to you,
please,
advice is going to be online on Sakai. But does it mean you guys don't read your notices? Because this announcement was sent about 3 days ago or yesterday. And by now you should have it. So I'm surprised you're asking. It's going to be on Sakai. I think the time is 3 p.m. 3 p.m. on Sunday. That's it. So please take note and revise. Who want to break my eardrum? Your what is not working?
She's trying to say the student mail is not working.
But how is your student mail not working? Okay, so at least now you know.
Go to the UGCS, they will help you.
You better go and get it resolved, please. Please go and get it resolved, because that is the only official communication. And as soon as I put it on Sakai and I allow for notification, once you have registered for the course, you get that notification. So please do take note of that, get it fixed. So we will all be on the same page. Right. So thank you very much. Yes.
Sir, please, we didn't talk about the
due time.
The time, yeah. For
it's
the assessment.
It's either going to be 30 minutes or 40 minutes, depending on the questions. If I get you 40 questions, you're going to have probably 30 minutes. If I get you less than 30,
okay, sir.
30 questions, you're probably going to get lesser numbers. So identify, use the opportunity to find a space where you know the internet is strong, have a backup internet services, and I'm sure you'll be good.
Okay, sir.
Sure. And you take your time, understand the question, and then answer. Because what I'm going to assure you is that I'm not going to do a lifting question. I will ask a question that requires you to think. And if you take your time, you read it properly, and you reflect on the discussions that we have had, you are more likely to have a good grade. I wish you all the best.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.